You guys are listening to the VBAC link, and I'm so excited for today's episode. We have Hazel Keedle today, and she's in Australia, and it's 1 a.m. She stayed up all night just to be with us today on this podcast. So grateful for her. So we're going to be time sensitive, so we can make sure to get her tucked into bed at a somewhat reasonable hour. But guess what? Today we have a co-host. I'm so excited to start bringing on some co-hosts here and there. And today we have Sarah, and she is one of our VBAC doulas, and I'm so excited to have her with us today. Sarah is going to actually do you the honors of reading you a review. So go ahead, Sarah.
Hi. Yeah, glad to be here. So we have a review from Caitlin Bayless, and this one is from Google. And it says, I honestly can't recommend the VBAC link enough. I had my son via C-section in 2021. And even though I am not pregnant with number 2 yet, I feel so ready and even excited for when that time comes because of all the stories and education from the VBAC link. I have been binging the podcast for the past couple of weeks and have a note in my phone that is specifically for VBAC resources and education that has been mentioned on the podcast. I am looking into providers and plan on starting interviewing some soon. I can't thank you all enough for all that you do, and I hope one day I can share my VBAC story.
Oh, I love that. Well, today's episode is going to have some more resources for you for sure.
You are tuned into the VBAC Link podcast with Megan Heaton, who is a longtime doula and VBAC mom herself, here to help you get inspired for birth after having had a C-section. Along with this podcast, the VBAC Link offers blogs, resources, and a comprehensive VBAC course for both parents preparing for birth and doulas wanting to take their VBAC education to the next level. Be sure to follow Megan and her team on all social media platforms for even more. Although these podcast episodes are VBAC specific, it is encouraged for all expectant moms to listen and educate themselves on how to avoid a C-section from the get-go. The purpose of this podcast is to educate and inform. It is not meant to replace advice from any other qualified medical professional. Here is your host, Megan.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. We are coming to you from the VBAC link, and we have a guest from Australia, and we're so excited to have her. We're so excited. We actually just connected here. I don't know, we're connecting for the first time, I should say today, but Hazel, our guest today, just connected with us about a week or two ago. And you guys, she's so amazing. It's 1 a.m. where she is at in Australia recording right now. So I just want to give her a huge shout out and thank you for being with us at 1 a.m. Oh my goodness. I told her I probably would have been like, no, let's find another time. But here she is. She is so dedicated at 1 a.m. recording with us. And I cannot wait to share with you this wonderful, wonderful human being. We are going to jump actually right into it because again, it's 1 a.m. there and I really don't want to take too much time. But I wanted to quickly introduce her. This is Hazel Keedle, and she is a lecturer of midwifery and completed her PhD in 2021 at Western Sydney University in Australia. Hazel has more than 25 years of experience as a clinician in nursing and midwifery, educator and researcher. Her research is, I might as well be 1 o'clock here, Hazel. Her research is recognized internationally and focuses on midwifery practice, education, and women's experience in maternity care. Hazel is passionate about improving support for women during pregnancy, birth, and early transition in mothering. She is amazing, and right here in my very hands, I am holding a book that she wrote. It's called Birth After Caesarean, Your Journey to a Better Birth by Hazel Keedle. And I definitely am going to suggest this, and we're going to talk more about her book here in just a minute. But I don't want to take too much of her time. So we're going to jump right into it, Ms. Hazel, and turn the time over to you to share all of your wonderful knowledge and, of course, your story.
Sure. Okay. So, well, thank you for having me here. And I really don't mind waiting up for you. Okay. So, my name is Hazel Keedle, and I'm originally from the UK, but I moved to Australia 20 years ago now with a backpack and never left. And I came over here as a nurse, and then I trained to be a midwife while I was here. I was kind of destined. My granny was a midwife in England, and she told me that I would be one. So I kind of followed what she said, and I became a midwife here. And then I wasn't particularly interested in vaginal birth after cesarean at that point. I was just busy trying to get my head around what being a midwife was and what it meant. But I quickly met my husband during my new grad year as a midwife, and we quite quickly got together and had a baby, which was a planned home birth, but ended up being he was being breech, and I ended up having an emergency cesarean because in my area at the time, this is 15 years ago, there wasn't anyone who supported breech vaginal birth. Mm-hmm. So I knew that I would have to have a cesarean. I didn't have a great experience, and I didn't do too well with my mental health afterwards. But then, which was not planned at all, I got pregnant again very quickly. And so there was only 4 months between my cesarean and getting pregnant. So when I did find out, which wasn't for another few months after that, because I was breastfeeding, I had to think about what I was going to do. And I really didn't want to have a cesarean. My whole first experience was the most hospitalized home birth you could have thought of. I had pneumonia at 34 weeks with my first, and then I had the cesarean, and then I had endometritis, so childbed fever after that. So I was in hospital 3 times.
My goodness.
And I was really sick, and I really didn't want to go through that again. But I also wasn't sure if I would get supported to have a VBAC, because there would only be 13 months between them, or 14 months, I thought at that point. So I did lots of reading. I was a midwife by this point, and I dug my head into the numbers. I read the only book that was out there, which was The Silent Knife, which, as you know, is very old, and it was very old then. But it was really good at giving me the statistics. I then updated my reading for a whole weekend. I kind of shut myself in a room and just read and read and read and read. And I came out a bit freaked out because a paper had come out that year that said if it was less than 6 months between a cesarean and conception, then you had a 2.7% chance of uterine rupture compared to less than 1%. And I got a bit freaked out by those numbers. And I came out to my hubby, who's a very rational numbers man. Mm-hmm. And I said, I can't do it. Like, I can't have a VBAC. And I told him the numbers. And he said, but you've got an over 97% chance of everything being fine. I was like, well, yeah. And he goes, well, it's more dangerous to get in the car and drive to the hospital. Like, why don't you just go for a VBAC? So I adopted his idea, and I thought that was a great idea. And I became dedicated to have a VBAC at that point. And I didn't realize at the time it would shape my future career and life goals. But I kind of stuck my head in the sand. I avoided antenatal care, to be honest, because I didn't want to hear the negativity. But I was a midwife, so I was able to get someone to, listen to my baby and do my blood pressure every time I went to work. And then I did plan a home birth for my VBAC, but all of my team couldn't be there at the time, so I transferred in, and I had to fight during my labour. I could go into it in the book, but there was lots of coercion, lots of, you must have your baby by 4:00, or we're going to a cesarean, and I had to just keep fighting. It was so hard just to keep fighting when you're in labour. And they also knew I was a midwife because I trained there, so I couldn't really understand why I had to fight so hard. And then I actually pushed her out of my vagina at 4:00 on the dot.
Oh my gosh, no way.
Yeah, the time they said they were going to take me to theatres was her birth time. And it was amazing. Like I didn't know I could feel that high after doing something that was so hard, but I did. And it left me with a couple of questions when I looked back and reflected on how I felt. Like, first of all, I wondered if there was any other women that felt as amazing as I did. Like, I really was on cloud 9. I felt like I was healed, that all the mental health stuff I'd had after my first was gone. But with that came a question of, well, how does any other woman in Australia manage to have a VBAC with that much drama, like with that much negativity during labour?
Yeah, and pressure.
And I was a midwife and I could see through it. but how did other women who didn't have that knowledge? And so I was left with those questions. I was at a community forum. We had a lot of access issues up here to our local maternity units. So there was lots of petitions and community action. And I went along to one of the forums and I shared my story, my VBAC story in that forum. And there was a professor of midwifery there who said, who I'd never met before, who said, you're a midwife. I think you should research this. And I stayed in contact. And then about a year later, I started doing research with her. And she was my supervisor for both my master's honors and then my PhD. And now we work together on other projects. So yeah, it was that kind of sharing my story in that location that started my research career. Well, I think having a VBAC started my research career, but that's kind of started my formal research career. And now I'm here. She's about to turn 14 and I have done a master's, a PhD, 5 or so papers on VBAC, maybe more, and written a book. So that's kind of my story in a nutshell.
Hey listeners, this is Megan here. I am super excited to share with you a product called Happy Healthy Hippie. I love finding new ways to boost vitality and support my health so I can keep doing what I love and feeling great while I'm at it. This brand has made choosing supplements easy. Happy Healthy Hippie makes a line of intentionally crafted, earth-grown herbal supplements to help support your whole self. I have personally loved taking the joy-filled and the be-grounded. I truly feel like my days have gone from crashing in the middle of the day and feeling overwhelmed to feeling more energy, motivation, and feeling so grounded at night. I'm even sleeping better. Right now, I'm so excited to share with you an amazing promo code. You can get 50% off your first subscription when you visit happyhealthyhippie.com/VBAC. That is spelled happyhealthyhippie.com/VBAC. This is Happy Healthy Hippie's best offer right now, so get in on the goodness. Order today for free shipping and your 50% off your first subscription at happyhealthyhippie.com/VBAC. And done amazing things and written a book. And it's so funny because you're like, yeah, it started, but I think it's been in you for a while, right? And then that just kind of inspired and gave you the extra umph and been like, okay, now I've gone through this. Now I've experienced this. How can I change this? How can I change this for everyone else? And like when I always had this desire for birth and passion for babies. I would have wanted to be a labor and delivery nurse. That's like what I wanted to do. And then I had my first C-section and was like, oh, that wasn't really what I wanted or what I envisioned.
Yeah.
And then after my second, learning more about doulas and birth and really the options, and then also going through that second cesarean, although it was healing and everything, just like having a different experience, I was like, yeah, this is what I'm doing. This is what I want to do. And so it's like, it was always in you and it's always in me, but like this experience that we have had, these experiences that we've had just lit the fire. Like
it became the drive. Like I'd always been interested in research. I'd done an honours degree when I was a nurse back in London. And so I had a bit of a passion for research and for reading the research. But I think you have to have that real drive and reason for going on such a big path. And definitely for me, it was not only how amazing I felt, it was just that question of, well, did other women feel that? And is it hard for everyone? But there was one point when I stayed overnight. I kind of wish I hadn't. I wish I'd gone straight home, but I got coerced to stay overnight in the hospital. And like midwives would be coming in and saying, are you the VBAC woman? And I thought, what is this? It's like a zoo and I'm like this prize animal that they're going to come and just stare at. Like, it made me think, well, actually, is that quite rare then to have a VBAC here? Is this really so rare that they've got to come in and go, are you the VBAC woman?
You're the VBAC woman. Yes.
Yeah, but I hadn't really learned much about it in my training. I was working in a low risk unit, so we didn't even offer VBAC in the hospital I was working in. So it was quite a rarity for me as well.
Yeah. So tell me more about VBAC in Australia. Tell me more about what what it's looking like, what it's seeming like, and what you've learned through all your education. I would love to know. I mean, we talked about, in the beginning, like I'm just here in Utah, and we are actually very fortunate. We have a high VBAC rate here. Cesarean rates are through the roof in general, but in my own opinion, but we still have a higher VBAC rate. And so it isn't, but we still have to fight for it, right? It isn't as uncommon, but like, I'd love to know more about, just more about your research and what you're seeing there in Australia. And
sure. So what is your VBAC rate out of interest in Utah?
I'm trying to remember the exact, I will look it up.
Because I think in the US in general, it's about 12%, isn't it? Last time I checked.
Yeah, that does sound right.
Numbers.
Yes.
And interestingly, when I do a lot of presentations on VBAC, and when you look across the world, they really do vary from Finland with over 50% down to over across to you guys with 12%, and we match you. So we actually don't have the higher European numbers. We have 12% as well.
It says 23.9.
Okay, so that's pretty good. And
27 to 20. Yeah. So it says in 2020, 23.1. Well, 23.1% were cesarean, but vaginal births after cesarean from 2017 to 2020, Utah averaged 23.9 overall. And then it breaks it down within the cities here.
Which is really good. I mean, I know that's not consistent across the US because then the national number comes right down.
Right.
We do have varieties over here, and those varieties are down to model of care and access. So here in Australia, we have a public maternity system or public hospital system that is paid through the taxpayer. And in that system, where everyone gets free healthcare, they will be able to access a few different models depending on what's available in their area. So they might have a midwifery group practice where they can see the same midwife throughout, and there'll be a few of them that are on call for free as part of the hospital service. But that's relatively new, and that's really only been rising in the last few years as the health services are increasing those models. We have the standard antenatal care, which is where women see whichever midwife's on duty or whichever doctor's on duty, and then whoever is in labour ward will look after them during labour, and then whoever's on the ward to look after them postnatally. We call that standard care, but we also call it fragmented care because you see somebody different all the time. Then we have, so outside of the hospital system, and we have some smaller ones for First Nations women and for migrant women, there's some specific models as well. But then outside of the public hospital system, we do have privately practicing midwives, which are they are able to prescribe medications, get some money back from Medicare, and offer home birth services. And some of them also have visiting rights in the hospitals. That is more state specific. We have more in Queensland than in any other state here in Australia for the visiting rights.
So they're able to come over, and like if transfer were need to happen and things like that, they could come over and perform.
Yeah, they could have like an agreement with the local hospital, but that's a growing thing, and it's more popular in some states than the others. Where I am, which is New South Wales, which is where Sydney is, there's only really one hospital that offers that in such a very big state. In Sydney. And then we also have private hospitals as well, where you would be through a private obstetrician. And so you'd get that continuity, but it's obstetric care, not midwifery care. You may or may not see a midwife during your antenatal period, and then it'd be whatever midwives are on in the labour ward in the private hospital, but with the private obstetrician that you've signed up for. So we've got a few different models of care. And what we do know from the studies that have been done, the VBAC rates do vary across those models of care. So they're higher with privately practicing midwives. So a lot of women who choose home birth are choosing it after a cesarean. And that's what I did my first study on, which was their experiences. And then we have good rates in midwifery models of care, such as the midwifery group practices. And then we have lower rates in private hospitals. So they have a higher repeat cesarean rate and a lower VBAC rate in private hospitals with continuity of obstetric care. So that's really how it looks. But obviously, we're a very big country with a lot of areas in between. So we'll have hospitals that maybe don't offer birthing services. For a lot of our remote communities, a bit like Canada, where, although I must say in areas of Canada, they have set up birthing on country services, we're still a bit behind on that. So it really is a variety of services. But most metropolitan hospitals, you'd get, a private model, a public model, and midwifery models within that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love it. I wish so badly that I had the capabilities to, like, I guess I was in a time in my life where I didn't have little kids, right? Like, where I could bounce around to, like, not only different states, but different countries, and somehow observe birth and, like, learn birth around the world. Like, that is, like, this dream of mine, that I could understand birth from all areas other than just, little Utah here. Because I have a doula partner who just came from Texas, and, like, birth is so different here in Utah than it is in Texas. And, like, you're describing, what you're describing is so different. And obviously, like, similarities all around. We hear all these stories, and there's definite similarities to birth. I mean, it's birth, but, like, the way care is and everything. So one day maybe I will be able to bounce around in life, but I love hearing that.
Well, that's right, because we're limited to then really what is published. And so some of the countries that have higher VBAC rates, so just across from us is New Zealand, where they have a midwifery model of care. And from the numbers that we can get from them, they don't have national data on this. They seem to have much higher VBAC rates to us, but then they don't publish very much on it. So it's really hard, unless you're there, it's really hard to get a sense of what's going on.
What's really going on and what they're doing and why they have such a high rate.
Yeah.
Other than maybe midwifery
there's some
care.
studies out there, especially the one in Europe. There's some studies that kind of looked into the culture and how different that is. But not enough to really give us an idea.
Absolutely. So, Miss Hazel, I would love for you to share more about your book too. Like, you have so many amazing things in this book. I'm going to hurry and just kind of flip over to, like, the table of contents, but it reminds me a lot about, like, our VBAC course. It covers just these so many incredible things, these topics. And obviously your VBAC journey is in there, your research journey, which I think is amazing, your PhD journey, and then birth trauma and experiences and symptoms of birth trauma, which is so important. We don't talk about that enough. Seeking help, debriefing, again, something we don't talk about enough. How to access debriefing. Like, I don't know if you want to cover any of that, but, like, that's so important right there. I mean, you have so many themes in this book. Maybe do you want to cover some of your highlights? Sarah and I, we're both here in the States, but we'd love to know more about this amazing book, which, by the way, listeners, we're going to have a link for this book if you want to purchase it and give it a read, because it's going to be amazing for you. I promise you.
Oh, thank you. Well, my publishers are in the US. So when I was writing it, I very much had the US in mind, Australia and UK. So that was, even when I looked at any resources in the book, I tried to find US ones as well.
Yeah, I noticed, like, you had some Lamaze and everything in here. Like, you have tables of where it's broken down, and it does have US things. So that's something I think that is so amazing, because a lot of our listeners are in the US. And so it's super nice to be able to read something and have some resources for here where they are.
Yeah. So the idea behind the book was, I was towards the end of my PhD journey, and I use a methodology called feminist critical theory. And part of that is that you kind of give back your research. You get your research or you get your data from women in the community, but then you kind of want to give back to transform that culture for the better. So when I was really evaluating, well, how do I do that? When I was writing up my thesis, I'm like, well, how am I giving back to the community? And I had research papers, and I know people read research papers. You guys do, and then you translate that evidence into your doula course. So I know people do that, but I thought maybe that's not everyone. And when I did my Australian VBAC survey, I asked what kind of resources people used, and there was a real want to have more books out there. So I wondered if I could have this crazy pipe dream of writing a book. And then I had the opportunity to do that. So I submitted my thesis in the October, and by the December I'd signed a book contract. So I was really keen, while it was all fresh in my head, just to kind of, get it all out down on paper. And I think lockdowns were kind of in my favor because I had to take leave because it was building up and I couldn't go anywhere. So it's like, well, I'll just sit and write this book then. And that's really how I used my time to do it. But I put it together as really my findings of my PhD. And one of the first papers I wrote on my PhD journey was looking at all the evidence that was out there. And the title of the paper was The Journey from Pain to Power. And that really that was a thread that kind of went through all of my PhD journey. So when I was then looking at, well, how do I write this book? The term journey was very high up there. And I thought, well, I'll go on that journey from pain to power. And so the first thing is that pain. And that's that previous cesarean. One of the things I found out from my studies was that usually in the community the birthing community, about a third of women say yes to experiencing birth trauma. And that's the full spectrum of birth trauma, which includes psychological birth trauma. And when I asked that question in my VBAC survey, so all these women had at least one previous cesarean, that was 2/3 of women that said yes to birth trauma. So we already know we have a highly traumatized group of women that have had a previous cesarean. So that's why I started with that. I think it's really important. And certainly I was a home birth midwife for many years, I know that you need to work that out and talk about it, debrief about it before you can, you got to kind of work out that past to be able to look forward to the future.
Yeah. So that's even recognizing it. Like sometimes it's actually hard to recognize that you look at your experience as traumatic, because I feel like too, so many times we're mentally trained to tell ourselves, oh, well, we had a safe baby, healthy baby. Yeah. So no, it's fine. And they suppress their trauma down. And they're like, no, I was fine. It was fine.
And we're led to believe that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's why I really brought in quotes and what it can look like for women, and quotes from the data that, the stories that women shared with me, for people to kind of go, well, maybe that is what I experienced then. Maybe those symptoms are what I'm experiencing. And I mean, I start that chapter off with, go grab yourself in pure English style, go grab yourself a cup of tea and a chocolate bar, because this chapter will be tough. Because just to recognize that this might not be the easiest one. It might not be where people want to start off with. They might go back to that. But yes, I started off with that pain. And then I used what I found through my PhD and what I did in my qualitative. So my PhD, I had a qualitative side, and then that moved into a quantitative. So the qualitative is all that feelings and experiences and exploration, and then the quant is all the stats and the numbers. And when I did the qualitative, what I did was I had this crazy idea of designing an app, and women after their appointments with their healthcare provider would come home and then record their experiences on the app. And then they would do that after every appointment. And then I interviewed them afterwards as well. And so I had some really rich data. Like I had 52 recordings. I'm so grateful to those women. I'll be forever indebted to those women. And then I had all these interviews as well. So I had these really rich stories. We use that term in qualitative data. There's like this rich data. And so
these were appointments leading up to their birth, or after, in the postpartum period after their cesarean?
No, this is during their pregnancy. So they were all planning to have a VBAC. That's what their plan was. And then they would go and see their healthcare providers, and then they would do recordings for me about, they were given some prompting questions, but it became very organic. Like it was more like a journal. Like they'd start going, hi, Hazel, I'm so many weeks now, and this is what just happened. And it was a really novel way. It hadn't been done. The research hadn't been done like that before. So it was really interesting. What I was able to do was a narrative analysis, which was comparing all their stories against each other to look for commonalities and for differences. And what I found is that there were these 4 factors that impacted how they felt after the birth, because I remember I interviewed them all after the birth as well. And those 4 factors, if they were really positive on those 4 factors across them, and they had a cumulative effect, so one with an impact on the other, they felt better about their birth experience regardless of the birth experience. If they felt lower on those 4 factors, they were more devastated after their birth experience. Now, it didn't mean that those who had a vaginal birth didn't feel more positive than those that had a repeat cesarean, because there kind of was that as well. But there was a lot of resolution that could come when you had a repeat cesarean and felt higher in those factors. And so those factors are then what I go into in the book. And there's a chapter dedicated to each one of those factors. And they are having control. So having control over your choices, your wishes, your birth outcomes. Then there's having confidence. So having confidence in your ability to have a vaginal birth after cesarean, but also having confidence in your healthcare provider's belief in you. That was quite surprising for me, how pertinent that was. Women really wanted to, I mean, it makes sense, doesn't it? You really want that person to believe in you and believe that you can do what it is that you want to do. And then there's having a relationship. So that was the relationship that you have with your healthcare provider, whether that's one that's, is developed, such as like in a continuity of care, or whether it's just with a different person each time. And even then, not all continuity is the same. And that really came out in the study. And then the last one is being active in labor. So that seemed a bit of a strange one to add on, but it was women who really felt they were able to do everything that they wanted to do during labor and birth, be as active as they could, as upright as they could. They felt better after their birth experience. And if that then ended with a repeat cesarean, then they still felt very positive because they had done everything that they could, compared to not having the opportunity to be upright and mobilized.
Yes. And that, we have found that, well, I have found that personally in my group of doulas, that we have found that through, even if it doesn't end the way they want or anything, like, like there's bumps and curves, and I mean, it's labor and birth, but along the way, if they felt like they were like in charge and being able to like be in the positions they want and call the shots a little bit more, like overall after, they felt immensely more positive and happy about their experience.
Yeah, absolutely. That's it. And I was really, in the book, then I kind of really go into what do they all mean. So the control chapter might take some people by surprise, because I know a lot of women, especially when they're reflecting on their previous cesarean, which may have been, let's just take probably the most common example these days with induction, is they're having their first baby, they get close to dates or post dates, they get encouraged to have an induction. The induction doesn't quite go to plan, and they have a cascade of intervention and have a cesarean. Then when they're then planning for the next birth, either before or during the pregnancy, one of the common themes is this getting armed with knowledge. It's like, okay, now I need to know everything about labor and birth and pregnancy, and I really want to be able to call the shots. And there's a bit of grieving in that time of, well, why did I say yes, or why didn't I say no? And a bit of self-blame. And I think as women, we are kind of hardwired to blame ourselves for everything, especially blaming our bodies, because we're never quite right. The media never lets us think that we're right, because we're either too big or too small, or our boobs are not quite right, or whatever. There's always something to make us feel better. And then we blame ourselves for not being able to stand up against the patriarchal medical system. So I actually start the control chapter looking at the impact of the patriarchy in medicine, and especially in obstetrics, and how the different waves of feminism has impacted that, and also the impact of reproductive justice, which is something that is obviously very important in the US, but also over here with our First Nations women and migrant communities that have come to Australia. So I look at all that and really kind of frame it to go, it's actually not your fault. It's actually really hard to stand up for yourself and say no when you're at the bottom of a very oppressive ladder. And not to kind of then say, well, you can't do anything, because then I explore other ways of what you can do to help that, and actually how you need all those factors together to really build your position, but almost to kind of take that guilt off, and also understand where we've got to today with a hospital-based maternity system, why it is like it is, and the impact of all those different changes in society that have got to where we are today. So yeah, there's all those different chapters. Kind of, some of them have activities. There's little like activities that you can do. There's a few guest writers in there. And then one of my favorite parts, probably because I didn't have to write it, was that I put an email out. I put a Facebook post out and asked for women who had any VBAC stories that they wanted to put in the book. And I wanted VBAC with just something a little bit different or complicated or risk or whatever. And I have got 12 stories of women from around the world, including the US, who've had VBAC with something a little bit different there. So it might be after multiple cesareans, like your story you were saying, or it might be at home, or it might be with a larger body, which, as we know, gets a lot of stigma in maternity care. There's one that is after a VBAC after a uterine rupture. There's one after a classical scar. So there's all these different stories in the book, at the back of the book in full with pictures, but I also weaved them into some of the chapters earlier as well. And so I love those stories. Some are short, some are in poem form, and some are really long. And I just kept them as they were and popped them in the book. So just really so women can kind of identify and go, well, maybe I'm not quite sure what Hazel's saying. And then they get to that story and they're like, oh, actually, I really relate to that person.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we're here on the VBAC Link podcast, right? Is like all of these stories, some of them you might not connect to as deeply. And then some you're like, oh my gosh, that's me. I felt that. I had that. That's like my story. Like, it's like,
absolutely.
It's like they're taking it out of my own mouth, you know?
Yeah.
We've had that. I mean, many times where it's like, whoa, like that was almost creepy how similar those births were. And then to be able to connect and be like, but look, they went on and they did it. And this is what they did. You know, it's so empowering. And, you know, just flipping through these beautiful pictures, like absolutely stunning pictures. So I'm sure these stories are going to, again, relate to so many people out there that may not even know that they're going to relate to them until they read them.
Yeah, and I do mention in the, oh my gosh, I'm testing myself which chapter that one's in now, but I think it might be confidence about really relating to stories and listening to podcasts. I mentioned that, but, you know, really need to tap in and tap into your peers, you know, because we have, you know, very large social media groups now and pages to follow full of positive VBAC stories, and that's important in there. Mm-hmm. I do also add, though, that it does say that the title is Birth After Caesarean. And I do, throughout the book, look at, you know, you are choosing the best birth for you. You know, need to be prepared for both, but you may be choosing, you may either have or choose a gentle caesarean. So there's a chapter in there as well about what a gentle caesarean is, what the evidence says, and what maybe some of the things that you might think of if you are, you know, if you have a repeat caesarean. So there is that part of it as well, because I explore how important it is to really, if you're going to be in control of everything or have more control, then you have to be aware of all options that might happen, and then be able to still have the best birth for you regardless of that outcome.
Yeah. You know, we just posted, we reposted, I should say, from Dr. Natalie Elphinstone, I think is how you say it. Hopefully I'm not butchering her last name, but she's from Australia, actually. She's an OB, and she posted this video of a gentle cesarean, and where like the mom was actively involved in like giving birth to her baby with her own hands, right? Like for me, like my cesareans, both of them, I was like, my arms were strapped down like in a T. And after my second daughter was born, they undid the one arm, and I did have skin to skin. I was able to hold her with that arm, but watching this video was like, it was captivating. I mean, it's a 30-second thing, but I watched it probably 40 times. Right? Like, because I'm like, oh my gosh. And like, I just looked at the mom, I looked at the baby, like at everyone around her, like there was no curtain. She was able to be totally a part of her birth. I'm like, yes, like this is what we need. And I mean, I literally texted a midwife here in Utah. I'm like, I know I'm a really small fish in a big ocean, but like, let me know if there's anything I can do from my end to start bringing this option to people, because like we had so many messages after like, whoa, how can I get that? What do I need to do? And it looks like in Australia, there's multiple videos of this happening.
I will add, it's not common, and it really does depend on who your OB
provider
is.
Exactly.
But a few years ago, one of my dear friends, she did her PhD as a video ethnography of skin to skin in theatre. So she was videoing the cesareans and seeing really what happens to what enables skin to skin in theatre and what doesn't. It was really fascinating. She was one of my PhD buddies, and one of the cesareans she saw was a gentle cesarean with the woman reaching down, grabbing her baby, and then she wrote this beautiful article. But it was actually it was like a midwifery college magazine that doesn't exist anymore. So I could see that she'd written it, but I couldn't find my copy of it. So I emailed, because we're friends, I emailed her and I said, look, do you have a PDF copy? Because I really want to read it. So she sent it to me and I read it, and then I wrote about it in that chapter. And then I sent the chapter to her and I said, can you just read it to make sure that I've said all the right things? Because this is, that's obviously her expert area. And she was happy with what I'd written. So that was good. And it really is down to providers. But really, the more women that ask for it, the more pressure there'll be to kind of explore it. And there is a lot of resources and videos out there now that can kind of show people how to do it
and how to do it, and that it is possible. Because I think sometimes it's like, no, that's impossible. It's a sterile environment. We can't have extra bodies in the operating room, but look, like it totally.
Well, I mean, the woman's already there, so that's not going to be an extra body. And really, if they, the ones that I've seen, really they will do the surgical scrub with their hands. They'll have double gloves on.
Yeah.
So when it gets to the point of needing to reach down, they can take that first pair of gloves off, and then you've got the sterile ones underneath. And there's lots that can be done, even just lowering the screen. Like there's often still a screen there, but it's lowered. So they can reach down and then take the baby, and then it can go back up while they do the suturing.
Absolutely.
So that there's ways it can be done, but it's just having people that understand why. Like I remember being in an OB's office once with a client, so a woman that I was caring for, and she was exploring her options after having a cesarean, and she mentioned having a gentle cesarean, and his attitude was, well, if I offer that, then nobody will want to plan a VBAC. And I was like, that's actually not going to happen, don't worry. Like, honestly, that isn't going to happen. It's just giving an option to women. Women still really want to have a vaginal birth after cesarean. That's not going to go down. Your rates are really not that high anyway, so don't stress. There's a lot you could do to support them. But that was an excuse of not wanting to go there because sounds a little bit too hard.
And that just goes back to sharing our stories too, because I feel like without sharing those experiences, like we were saying, you're not going to know what your options are if you're not being informed about them. So if others are doing this and more people are asking for it, then it's going to open that door and allow other people to be able to be in control of what they want for their birth.
And throughout the book, it is really based on evidence. I am a researcher with a very large library of articles. And I did dive into them. So straight after the trauma chapter, I go into what is the evidence for the different choices. I have a really deep dive into uterine rupture. And then what was meant to be part of a chapter actually ended up on its own, which was, can I have a VBAC if? And then I look into some different scenarios or issues that, potentially, well, people will say, well, can I have a VBAC if I've got this? So that is all evidence-based with the numbers and going through, what current data is out there.
Right. There's a lot of percentages in your book, because I love it. I love that. And there's graphs. I mean, I know this is like totally, you may not think that this may impact care or anything, but she has this, it's figure 2 in the book, but it's talking about length of time from pregnancy appointments under different models of care. And you may not right now think like the length of an appointment matters, but I can tell you right now firsthand from experience that when I had with my VBAC kiddo, I switched care like at 24 weeks, and I had an OB, and he was great. I mean, seriously, love the guy. He's wonderful, and I still think he's wonderful. But then I switched care to a midwifery model-based care. And the difference between my visits, and again, like OBs will spend time, but like for me, the difference between my visits was incredible. And I actually really looked forward to my visits with my midwife, because I was always greeted with a ginormous hug. Always. Like she never didn't walk in without like giving me a big hug and saying, how are you doing? Like, really, how are you? And then would sit down and really, we would just have a discussion. Like she became my best friend, right? Like I could just open up to her, and she spent time, quality time. And it really helped me as I was entering into this next stage of birth to feel confident in her, because I was so comfortable because of all the time that she spent with me.
Yeah. And I love that. I do love that graph. And that came out of my VBAC in Australia survey. And we asked what model of care they had. And then I asked, what was the time frame, what was the time spent at your appointments? And when we looked at the data, like it was just so obvious that shorter time frame, so maybe 5 to 15 minutes, was certainly with obstetric-led care. And then the 20 minutes plus, and certainly with the privately practicing midwives, it was more than an hour usually, was with the midwifery models of care. And the reason why that's important is because relationships take time. And that, in that relationship factor, you need to have someone by your side who understands your wishes, your trauma, if you have some, which, as I said, 2/3 of the women did, and understand what you want and what you're planning for and what you're hoping for, and just understand you and how you tick. Because certainly in my years as a continuity of care midwife in all models of care, you really, for me as a midwife, I really want to know the person that I'm caring for, so that I can see those changes, those really subtle changes in behavior even during labor, and also to see when you can pick up when things aren't quite right, and that you might need an extra hug at that time or an extra kind word. And that takes a lot of trust. And relationships in healthcare, I believe, should be based on trust and equity, and that takes time. So the very simple graph, there's no way I could have done an appointment in 10 minutes, because I have to have a cup of tea at least. And there's no way I can drink one cup of tea in just 5 or 10 minutes. So sit down and, have a cup of tea and learn about what's going on. The physical part, the feeling the baby, the blood pressure, that's that you do at some point, but actually finding out what's going on for the woman and how she's feeling and, what's going on with the family, that was far more important. And that takes time. So when we saw that in the graph format, it's like, oh, perfect. That exactly shows what we're saying, is that this relationship takes time. And most of us, certainly in our Western world, that we don't usually marry someone that we haven't really, or get into a relationship with someone that we haven't spent a fair bit of time with and figured out whether we like them or not. So we understand that those relationships are important. And I think when you're only doing something a few times in your life, but you will remember it for the rest of your life, then you really want to choose the team and the support people there. And that includes your healthcare provider, who completely know you and completely understand where you've come from and where you want to go to.
Oh my gosh, I love it. So, I feel like I could talk to you until 4 a.m. in Australia. Like, we could talk forever.
I'm wide awake now.
I know. My family and I are getting ready. We're going on a family vacation this weekend. And that your book is going to be in hand the entire airplane ride there and back, because I want to soak in every single word that you wrote in this book. And I'm so excited. And I definitely encourage everyone. I haven't even read it yet, but I've skimmed, I should say. I started, but I haven't had time to just sit down and read. And it's going to be amazing. I can already tell just browsing through this and listening to you. Oh my gosh. There is something that you say in here, and it's in the very beginning. This is where I have stopped reading, but it was something that it impacts me personally, because I feel emotional. It's kind of funny. I felt like this. I felt like a failure. And I feel like there's so many times in life that we can, like you said, we beat ourselves up. if it's not about our body, it's about something else. But like failure is a word that comes in. And I actually have recently, today actually is going to be launching, but I recently made a reel about failure and how there is no such thing as failure. But this is something, if you don't mind, I'm going to quote you reading this book. It's page 10, everybody, if you have the book. In this book, I will talk about planning an elective cesarean, planning a VBAC, having an elective cesarean, having a VBAC, or having a repeat emergency cesarean. There is no failure. You haven't failed if you choose one birth mode, but have another. You are amazing and your choices are valid. Be true to you. And that to me is so powerful. Be true to you. And no, you did not fail, no matter what birth mode you chose or what birth mode ended up happening, right? Like, don't you feel like Sarah? Like, I don't know. I don't know how you feel.
I completely agree on that. And I think, that touches back into the trauma too, that maybe you're not aware of, that you've experienced, and really, fear clearing and taking the time to process your previous birth, knowing that whatever the outcome is for your next journey, you're not that failure. You're fine and perfect. You're enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you are enough. Yes.
And the research, when you read it, it's really full of emotive, damaging words when it comes to VBAC. Saying that women are a trial of scar or a trial of labor, we're not criminals for wanting to have a vaginal birth. Mm-hmm. And when you use that language in research, then it means clinicians, OBs and midwives and nurses will use that language as well and tell you that you're on trial. And what do you imagine when you think of that? You're not thinking about, is this uterine scar going to survive? You're going to feel that you're a criminal, and you are not, just because you want to have a vaginal birth. So I even challenge researchers, take that language out. You don't need it. It's unnecessary. I've been writing a paper with some OBs over here recently and just saying, I won't be on it if you use the word trial. I won't be on it if you use the term failed or succeeded. We will just take the emotive words out and just call it what it is. Because we have to show by example as well, and not have that language in the papers that are influencing policy and guidelines and practitioners.
Yeah. There's such power in language and the words that we use.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, well, Hazel, it has been such an honor to chat with you. Like I said, I feel like we could go on and on and on. And maybe we just need to have you back on, or maybe we need to do something even bigger and do like a webinar with you, because you have such a wealth of knowledge and we're so grateful for you. And like I said, everybody, like, we will have the link for her book, Birth After Caesarean, Your Journey to a Better Birth, in our show notes. So Hazel, before we go, do you want to share where everyone can find you? I'm going to be sharing you all over our social media as well. And we're going to have everything in the show notes, but tell people where we can find you.
Yeah, sure. So I'm on Instagram at Hazel Keedle, and I'm on Facebook at VBAC Matters, or Hazel Keedle VBAC Researcher. And so that's where I share my, obviously all the book information, but also, future research that I'm doing as well. And I'd be love to come on and do a webinar with you and talk further about this at any time, even at 2 a.m.
Even at 2 a.m. You are amazing. We are so grateful for you. Seriously, thank you so much, Hazel. And I can't wait to share this episode with the world.
Thank you for having me.
A lot of what we talked about in the episode is so important and so, true to how I feel too. I think, calling out trauma has been something that's really near and dear to my heart, and something that I had to do in preparing for my own VBAC. So I definitely recommend anybody that is going through this journey to make sure you're taking the time to really heal from that previous birth, and taking time to process and doing some fear clearing, and even, physical healing from the scar, and doing scar massage and such like that. And also just, I really think it's important finding that support and building that relationship. Like Hazel was talking about, making sure that you have somebody that you are able to build a relationship and feel comfortable with, because that's going to matter so much when it comes to your birth. And also finding a doula that you have a good relationship with, not just your provider. So, I think those are really main things that I really try to instill in anyone that's, going for a VBAC.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I 100% agree. And Sarah, we're so happy to have you in our VBAC Link doula community. Can you tell everybody where they can find you as well?
Yeah, sure. So I am in Simpsonville, South Carolina. It's the upstate of South Carolina. More commonly, I guess you'd be familiar with Greenville, South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And so I am in that area, and you can find me mostly, I hang out on Instagram. So either Sarah Marie Bilger or Entering Motherhood. You can find me there on Instagram. And, we're actually planning on starting up local VBAC support groups.
Wow.
So if anybody is around and in the area and interested in doing that, there's going to be me and another doula in the area. And we're excited to start that and really provide in-person support for, people either that have had cesareans, maybe thinking of a VBAC, or really just, any realm of cesarean VBAC. If you've already had your VBAC and you want to come share a story of success to, motivate and help women that are preparing for it as well, we're going to include story sharing and different topics to cover. So
absolutely amazing. Awesome. And when you are all when all that information is available, if you wouldn't mind shooting that over to us, and we will make sure that the world knows, that everyone in Carolina knows. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for co-hosting with me today. It was such an honor to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Would you like to be a guest on the podcast? Tell us about your experience at thevbaclink.com/share. For more information on all things VBAC, including online and in-person VBAC classes, the VBAC blog, and Julie and Megan's bios, head over to thevbaclink.com. Congratulations on starting your journey of learning and discovery with the VBAC Link.
Who are you? I'm you, from the future. What do you want? I want to tell you about Dave. Dave has your future money. Spend it on whatever you need. With extra cash from Dave, you can get up to $500 instantly with no interest and no credit check. Download the Dave app from the App Store right now. That's DAVE. Sign up for an extra cash account and get up to $500 instantly. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Instant transfer fees apply. Banking provided by Evolve. Member FDIC.